Hey, this is Ed. Before we get started, I want to thank two brand new podcast supporters, Ken Whittykind and Madison Hilton. Thank you guys so much. Both Ken and Madison signed up to be Patreon supporters, which means they are supporting the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon. I have that option. I also have one-time support options as well. You can check both of them out at mountainandprairie.com/support if you're interested. If you're not, keep listening for free. It's free, always will be. I really appreciate your attention for an hour or hour and a half. That's very valuable in itself. So thank you so much for that. For Patreon supporters, real quick announcement, I'm going to be sending out a monthly update later this weekend, and I've got two pretty exciting announcements in there. One about a event that will be happening this summer, and then one about another little project I'm working on. So that is for Patreon supporters. Everybody else will hear about it eventually, but I'm going to give a little sneak peek to those who have supported the podcast on a monthly basis. But seriously, big thanks to everybody for your support, for listening, for sharing it with your friends, for giving it reviews on iTunes. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Have a good weekend. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Len Necefer. Len is a scholar, entrepreneur, and outdoor adventurer who's also a proud member of the Navajo Nation. Academically, Len holds a Ph.D. in engineering and public policy, and he's currently a professor of both Indian studies and public policy at the University of Arizona. In business, he's the CEO of NativesOutdoors, a cutting-edge outdoor apparel company that uses its platform to advocate for the cultural empowerment of Indigenous people. And to top it all off, Len is a committed mountaineer, backcountry skier, and rock climber, having ticked off countless impressive adventures throughout the West. It's clear that Len has accomplished a lot personally, but what's even more impressive is the positive ripple effect his work is having on the outdoor industry. By melding his professional expertise, personal interest, and cultural heritage, he's become one of the leading voices advocating for Native American representation in outdoor recreation and conservation. His work and personal story have been featured in big-time publications such as Outside and Alpinist, and he's recently delved into filmmaking with his newest film, Welcome to Gwichyaa Zhee. As you'll hear, Len has a unique ability to educate and inspire, and his message is striking a chord with a large, engaged audience. As you'd expect from a guy as multifaceted as Len, he offers up a wealth of knowledge in our conversation. We talked about his Navajo heritage and discussed the unique history and culture of the Navajo tribe. We chatted about his recent film and discussed the impact of oil and gas development on native populations in areas such as Bears Ears and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We chatted about the need for mutual respect between the outdoor industry and indigenous groups, and Len explains two interesting case studies around rock climbing on sacred native lands. He gives an excellent overview of his company, NativesOutdoors, and he explains why he chose to start a business instead of starting a nonprofit. As usual, we discuss favorite books, films, and the best advice he ever received. Thanks so much to Len for carving out time to chat. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. When you meet somebody for the first time, never met them, and you introduce yourself and they ask you that question, what do you do? What is your answer to that question?
Oh my God. I guess it depends on who I'm talking to, and it mainly depends on who I'm talking to.
Sure.
It's funny. So yeah, I can give you the list of things that I do. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Arizona. I have joint appointments in the Department of American Indian Studies and the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy. And so my research focus is on Indigenous people and natural resource management. And so I'm trained as an engineer. in mechanical engineering, and then also my doctorate's in engineering and public policy, which is 1 degree. The joke is that they beat the social science into the engineers. My work in Indian country, like there's such a huge component of social cultural values that, working on technical issues, I have to have a good understanding of those dynamics as well, in order to create effective policy. So that's my U of A hat. I started an apparel company, and now we're kind of morphing into a media company as well called NativesOutdoors. We've done outdoor apparel and products, and then also done media and storytelling. And so that was my role. That kind of was the entry point into the outdoor industry. And then I'm also on the board for the Honnold Foundation and the American Alpine Club.
Yeah. And we only have an hour to talk, and that's like 10 hours worth of conversation there.
Yeah.
I guess maybe the easiest way to dive into this is just with you personally and how you ended up on this path that has led you to do so much cool stuff. And I guess we'll just start. Where did you grow up?
I grew up between Lawrence, Kansas, and Saley, Arizona. My dad is from Detroit, and my mom is from northern Arizona, and they met at a tribal college called Haskell in Lawrence. And then I later moved back to Saley when I was about 10 or 11. So, basically the broader Southwest, I've moved around quite a bit, around like New Mexico, Arizona area, but I think of the Four Corners as home.
Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about your heritage and the tribe you belong to? Yeah.
So my mom is Navajo, and, they're from a place called Red Valley, Arizona. And, it's been, I would say, probably the most formative part of my identity and like how I spend time outdoors was always from a ceremonial perspective first, or sheep herding, actually.
Yeah.
And my dad is from Detroit, and he comes from a Romanian and Scottish family, like on each side. They're second generation American. And so that identity for my father is that when he was a young man after college, he just wanted to get the hell out of Detroit. So he ended up moving to San Diego and substitute taught, and then lived in a van for a little bit and surfed.
Oh, that's cool.
So, and then he ended up spending some time in Liberia in the Peace Corps. So he was always, both of my parents are always kind of willing to teach me how to rough it.
Sure.
And I think that was something that I really valued, but it was from, two very different perspectives of one being like kind of a ranching sort of, I would say kind of ranching experience, not fully, but and also a recreation side. So I kind of had an opportunity, one, to be connected to the land through, the Navajo traditional ceremonies, hunting that my uncles did, ranching, and then also just getting outside and having fun too.
Yeah, well, when you hear that, it makes perfect sense, kind of where you've landed, or where you've earned to be through a lot of really, really hard work. Could you just talk a little bit about the history of the Navajo tribe and the heritage? Because I've read a decent amount about Navajos, and I'm not at all a scholar in Native American history, but from what I know, they are an extremely unique tribe for a lot of different reasons. And I was wondering if you could just kind of give an overview of the tribe, the territory that they've historically inhabited, and just kind of talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
So, the Navajo people are, what really unites us is a language, because historically we've been a mix of a lot of different people, and that's reflected in our clan system. So there was a lot of intermarriage and contact with the tribes of the Southwest. And so in our clan system, that's reflected, is that when people introduce themselves, they introduce their 4 clans, and they all are of different people from across the Southwest. And I think that kind of speaks to sort of the amount of difference within the tribe. Like there's a wide range of experience there and perspectives. Navajo Nation is the largest tribe in the U.S. by population and landmass. It's about the size of West Virginia in terms of landmass. And I think there's about 350, 400,000 people, Navajos, enrolled.
Oh, wow.
And most live off the reservation. I think it's like about half live off. It's like half and half. And so most folks live in places like Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, Denver, for example. So, but when I grew up, my grandfather talked about how the original Navajos that came to the Southwest, they're, what modern linguists today call Athabascan speakers. And, he always said that those 4 original clans, they were really tall, like they were very tall people. And that was kind of the remnant, or the ways in which you can see that play out today is that a lot of the intermarriage with the Pueblos, like you see some tall Navajos, you see some short Navajos, but he always said that the original Athabascans that came from the north were pretty tall. And we have a bunch of language relatives up north in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because I was just up in Fort Yukon, Alaska, making a film, and it's a Gwichyaa community, and they're from the same language family, the Athabascans, and people are tall there.
Really?
Yeah, totally. It was like kind of one of those things of like hearing that from my grandfather and then going up to there, and I was like, oh wow, like they actually are tall.
That's really cool. And I just watched that film last night, and man, it is so good. You directed that?
I was a co-director, and my buddy Greg Balkin did the filming.
Okay.
But we worked on the story and sort of in the narrative arc on pretty in depth. So
I love that, and we're just gonna kind of jump all over the place. But can you talk a little bit about that film? Because, and I'll embed it on the web page so people can be sure to find it. But I thought it was so interesting. Just one of the things that stuck out was how you said, you're from Arizona, but you go as far north as you can possibly go in North America, and you feel like you're at home for a lot of different reasons: the sights, the smells, the people. Can you just give an overview of that film? Because I loved it.
Yeah, the film is called Welcome to Gwichyaa Zhee. We made it with the support of the Wilderness Society in Patagonia. We just wrapped up a 12-city tour a couple weeks ago, so I'm really happy to be home.
Nice.
But the film is it's about 12 minutes and it focuses on the indigenous perspectives of the Arctic Refuge and how that particular fight is no different than what's happened, like say in Bears Ears or Standing Rock or other places where indigenous people have been leading an environmental fight. It just happens to be really far away in the most remote part of this country. So what in large part the film was to, use my lens as sort of like an Anthony Bourdain sort of character to go and see Fort Yukon and experience it in the way that I guess I have before. I used to work with these communities when I was at the Department of Energy, and so I had a number of contacts already there, and I was well aware of the issues and challenges around the refuge and the importance. And so, that was really cool to be able to share a little bit about that experience of having worked there a bit. Is that the more time I spent there, it just feels like a very densely, spruce forested shiprock or something. But the part of the thing that makes that so similar is that the languages are very similar. There's words that we have that are the same, very like almost the same. And you saw that in the movie. Where I'm talking with that woman and we were comparing different words. Like one that we compared was fish, and it was just really awesome. And I think the thing that felt most like home was just the people. I think one of the things that was just really, having worked in the community before and built relationships, it was just, it almost felt like going home in a way, because the generosity of people, like we would go, before we would interview people, we would sit down and we ate so much moose. People were just offering us, meal after meal after meal. And it was great. And I think that was one of the cool things that came away from that film, is like, we didn't just make a film, but we also made lifelong friendships. And hopefully, our hope is to make a little bit longer film about the refuge using this as a basis.
Well, I loved it, and one of the main reasons I loved it is because I feel like with both Bears Ears and with the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, there's endless media about why these places need to be saved, but I'd say 99.9% of it focuses on the natural beauty and the wildlife and the stuff that makes it fun for recreation. But what I liked about yours was it focused on the human impact, and
Totally.
with the human impact of people who have been there longer, just as long as pretty much any living creature. And so can you just talk a little bit about the human impact of oil and gas development in these beautiful landscapes?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the focus on the refuge for quite a while was on like kind of plants and animals and landscapes, and not so much people. One of the things that has been, in introducing this topic to a new generation of younger folks that might not have heard of the refuge, which is actually pretty common. A lot of young folks have never heard of Bears Ears or the refuge. But one of the things that I was finding is that in engaging these young folks on why the refuge matters, we found that focusing on the issue, what's happening there as a human rights issue rather than a environmental issue, a human rights issue with a significant environmental component, was something that drew a lot of young people in learning about what's happening there, and also keeping them interested in this particular topic. And I think that's been an interesting sort of reframing of the Arctic Refuge that we've been trying to advocate for. And in large part, this has been coming at the direction of Bernadette Dementeff, who is in the film. She's the director of the Gwichyaa Steering Committee. And, her language around that has been very helpful and informative for us because, at the end of the day, these landscapes are, in many ways, we're all part of it. And we're writing the next chapter of, the 40,000 years of history in the case of the Arctic Refuge. But I think one of the things that's very unique about Indigenous people is that many of these landscapes, our cultures and these landscapes have evolved together over this period of time. I think for the Gwichyaa, their identity and culture is tied to the caribou, and rightfully so. I mean, they've been living alongside these animals for 40,000 years. And so they have a very deep relationship with this place or with this animal and the place that these animals then go and calve. And so for them, protecting the caribou and protecting this place in many ways is protecting their identity. And I can relate to that a lot being in Bears Ears because my original Navajo clan, Tachitni, is actually a Hopi clan or an ancestral Puebloan clan. And so my roots and lineage in the Southwest go back much further than, say, the original Navajo folks that came from the north. And so I think in learning that about myself and then seeing what's happening up there, it's also this, I think it's trying to give folks that, maybe have not encountered that sort of identity or connection to land as kind of a little window and being able to see why this is an important thing. And I was just, in going back and talking about the connection of culture and landscape, many of these landscapes in which Native people live, they've been tended and managed so much so that they can't exist without that sort of intervention anymore. I mean, one example is Yosemite. The Awenee people used to burn those valleys in large part to maintain an oak grove, or the oak trees down there, which was their primary food staple, was the acorns. And so they would selectively burn these valleys. And, fire was a major component of the ecosystems there. They just basically used that particular regime to support their way of life. And now, when Mira first went there, he was in awe about how park-like this place looked. But in large part, it was because of very active management by Native people in that valley. And yeah, I mean, it's been kind of an interesting opportunity to give people an insight about, why these cultural identities matter. Because I think one of the things, the value that can be derived from that is if people have a landscape or a place that they feel intimately connected to, I think it gives a much more of a chance when we're talking about, making strides in conservation.
I agree completely with that. And yeah. I think the point you made about the human rights, this kind of intersection of human rights and conservation is really interesting, because my wife used to work at a international development group that would focus on that intersection around the world. And what I found was so interesting about it was like they'd be in Brazil or somewhere where an indigenous tribe was being forced out of a valley so some big company could build a dam and flood their homelands. And, these people are not environmentalists because, they love recreating outdoors or have some love for the landscape as much as they're trying to protect their family and their land and their home ground. And they don't have a choice but to fight against these forces. And I think at least in the U.S., that environmentalism has this reputation of being a somewhat privileged point of view. But I think that where the rubber hits the road, like up there in Alaska, Bears Ears, around the world, it's a matter of life and death. It's not some feel-good kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it totally does. And I mean, you can look at that like in the roots of how conservation, the movement started in this country. It was not meant to be a preservation of peoples and cultures. And I think that's just what we've inherited. And I think in thinking about where do we go next, I almost feel like that's kind of where the opportunity lies. One of the a little story, a little vignette that I was told. There's a pro climber, Nat Geo photographer named Renan Osterk that I actually had present in my class. He was historically been, this pretty renowned climber, and he's made the transition to do more filmmaking and cultural based work. And so he's done a lot of work with indigenous communities across the U.S. on food sovereignty and food security. But he was talking about the I think it was the Yurok tribe in Northern California, and how, in talking about this connected identity to this place, they with I think it was the placenta or something like that, when at the afterbirth of a child once, it was the umbilical cord. They bury the umbilical cord and the placenta next to with a new redwood tree and for a person. And so their connection to the land is one, the person, but also this tree, and the person and the tree have to be taken together or taken care of together, because if one dies, the other does too. But effectively there's been an entire redwood forest that's been planted because of this. And in a very deep way, I mean, literally the DNA, is directly connected. I mean, it's directly in these trees, and like their sort of sense of place and being is very much that. And you can look back 10,000 years, and that's their connection in this place, which is long and deep rooted. And that was such a cool little story of that, even here in the United States, that there's that identity as well. But the one thing that sticks with me in my research is there was a figure I read that said that Indigenous people represent less than 5% of the world's population. However, the lands that we live on and inhabit contain 80% of the world's biodiversity.
Wow.
And, I look at that and I'm like, well, that's not surprising, because so much of our societies have been grounded in this identity of connection to place as if it were ourselves, right? So like the land is us sort of thing. And that makes sense that that's the case. But I think that's kind of what I think in the past 100 years of looking what's happened in this country is that particular narrative hasn't been a part of the discussion, because, Indigenous people have been living in this country for thousands and thousands of years, but it's because of their stewardship that we have all these places that we enjoy today. We didn't screw it up. But I think we're now entering a different place where, we have a different land management regime with public lands, et cetera. And I think there's an opportunity to build upon that long legacy of history, and that we, as this country, are inheriting, something that is to be proud of. And I think that's an immense opportunity to kind of shift this the discussion of conservation to also include people as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I feel like almost everybody who loves the outdoors, loves outdoor recreation, would agree with that. But for some reason, there's this gap and people, this knowledge gap, and people, it just doesn't even cross their mind. And so that's what I love about your filmmaking. And then I think this is a good time to talk about Natives Outdoors, because it seems that is one of the goals of your business is this education and helping people, specifically the outdoor industry, understand the real history of these places where we love to recreate. So can you talk a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Natives Outdoors and kind of where things stand with that?
Yeah. It started as an Instagram account, and then I just saw a lot of opportunity. One to, I guess, taking a further step back, for me, I did a lot of cycling and biking and hiking when I was younger, and I just found that it was just such a great way to connect with the landscape, and to move through it slowly instead of blasting through it on a highway or something. And it was a really grounding experience. And it was also a way that, being far from the res, it was a way that I could connect with landscapes that were different. And I think outdoor rec gave me a tool to be able to connect with very different landscapes, whether it was, when I was living in Pittsburgh and going to school there. It was a tool. It was a tool to keep this groundedness and connection to land. And I didn't really realize that's what was happening until years later. But the other piece that I saw is, for a lot of tribes, there's a lot of discussion about how to have sustainable economies and how to address issues of public health. And I think that outdoor rec is just a vehicle for one, to address those things, but also an opportunity as cultural education as well. That's kind of the original framing. But the other piece is that I think I began seeing with a lot of the folks I went outside with is that there was more of a curiosity of the history of these places. I remember on a few occasions I went with some friends doing some backcountry skiing in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we came upon a hunting blind that was just it looked like a pile of rocks, but it was made by the original Arapaho inhabitants,
wow.
And it was still, we could, and I saw it, I had seen it before, and I talked to a ranger, and they told me what it was, and just to have that sort of opportunity to be able to go out in a landscape and see that. I saw it as an opportunity to educate. That's been I think there's a desire for that, I think, among a lot of people, because the education that we receive about Indigenous people in this country is not very good.
That's an understatement.
And I don't like to call it remedial education, but I think, I had to go to grad school too to learn this stuff as well, even as a Native person. But I think one of the things is that I think it's an incredible classroom. I think a lot of, organizations like Outward Bound and Knowles look at the outdoors as a classroom, but so do Indigenous people. Like our cultural traditions, our language, everything is taught through the outdoors because that's where it's grounded. And so I saw this as a really cool opportunity to engage with the broader public, but also engage with our communities as well, and looking at outdoor rec as this opportunity and vehicle. But the other piece of why we started selling outdoor products is because the main reason is that I didn't want to be treated as a charity case. Mm-hmm. And so we, looking at the long traditions of art and talent in Native communities, I just thought this is an amazing pathway for young Native designers and entrepreneurs and athletes to engage in an industry that I think in many ways addresses some of these challenges of public health and sustainable economies. And so we created outdoor products. We're actually ramping up this year and doing some more. And, in a way, it's also to engage this larger industry that is basically the vehicle in which a lot of people get outdoors. Granted, like I'm of the belief that you don't need the fanciest stuff to go outside. And I think sometimes it's a little, I think there's a little bit too much of a commodification of the outdoors. But I think our voice in that space of the outdoor industry is, an important one because, all of these landscapes where this recreation is happening on has been stewarded by Native people. So, I think to add a story in the products that we sell, and then also a story in the brand that we have, is pretty much written in the landscape. And I think that's been a very easy talking point. And I think the media is just simply an extension of that. And that's been a lot of fun to connect those two, connect story to product, etc. And so, and the last piece is that we use our products to support organizations that deal with language and culture revitalization, and also outdoor access in Native communities as well.
That's great. And the thing that sticks out to me that I think is so smart about it is that you're a for-profit company, because I work in private land conservation, and for every 1 hour I spend doing an actual conservation deal, I probably spend 3 hours raising money. Uh-huh. And that's just the reality of it. And so when you can cut that out, it almost reminds me of what Patagonia has chosen to do with their business is that, it's this cash generating machine, and then they're able to use the cash as they see fit. I mean, I think yours is obviously a lot heavier on the impact side of things, but I think it's such a smart model, and you're not beholden to anybody except yourself, which is pretty damn cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad you brought up Patagonia, because in large part that was we've taken their model and kind of honed it a little bit more on Native communities because it's effective.
And so when you're making waves in the outdoor industry, and you're written up in all these different publications and making films, and so how have you been received, and how has your message been received by the outdoor industry? I mean, is it soaking in?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Seems like it.
I mean, it just yeah, I think so. I did a piece in the Alpinist a couple issues ago. About one of our sacred peaks, which is called Cisna Jine, and it's also, in English, it's called Blanca Peak. It's in the San Luis Valley.
Oh yeah,
big 14er, big mountain. And it was from a story that I went with a pro athlete named Brody Levin, and we attempted to climb it in the middle of January, and it was quite the epic. But we actually didn't make it up. We had to bail, but. But the main part of that story was trying to connect like that his sort of outdoor experience of being a ski mountaineer to these indigenous stories of the land. And that's been, I think one of the things that's been really cool is connecting with a lot of these pro athletes and giving them the experiences that can help them articulate and understand the importance of these areas and the indigenous stories behind them. And, at the end of the day, like Native people are we're such a small percentage of the population, but I've found a lot of success in, having these experiences be very meaningful for like outdoor athletes and folks with a lot of reach, because if they're talking and saying and bringing these issues up or advocating for Native people, it really makes a big difference. And I think at the end of the day, the outdoor industry and I've been a huge advocate is that I think that the outdoor industry and tribes together can be a very formidable force for conservation and climate change issues. And one part is because tribes are sovereign nations and they have very unique legal standing when it comes to public lands management and also just relationships with the U.S. government that the outdoor industry doesn't have. But I think the outdoor industry, one, is a big industry in terms of dollars, but also just in terms of social capital. There's a lot of influence that can be made by visually stunning images or stories, et cetera. And I think that at the end of the day is the larger goal, is to make sure that, Native people in these industries work together because, it seems like until recently, there's been a larger coalition of folks fighting against efforts to address climate change and also land conservation. And I think this is the alignment that I think is important for us as a country moving forward. And so in talking about that, there's a political reason. There's an economic piece of this as well. One of the models that I pulled upon was the EU, for example, the European Union. A big reason why that they pushed for economic integration of all the different countries was in part to reduce conflict. Because pre-EU, Europe was a pretty war-torn, war-riddled country.
Yeah.
But when you have economic connections and there, it can reduce that. It kind of reduces the chances of conflict. And Native people and outdoor recreation have not always been on the same side of the issue on a lot of things. And the most salient example is with climbers and tribes. There's been a ton of conflict. And I think it's almost to each's detriment. And I think there's an opportunity to flip that script and work more collaboratively. And I really think that's what happened with Bears Ears. Climbers and tribes came together in a way that was very important. And I think moving forward and looking at the Arctic Refuge, is simply building upon that model.
Could you talk a little bit about Devil's Tower up in Wyoming and how that has been a case study for cooperation and mutual respect among climbers and tribes?
Yeah, I don't think Devil's Tower is the best example for collaboration. But
what is the best? What would you say is Bears Ears?
I would say Bears Ears is. I mean, I can talk about Devil's Tower. I mean, it was.
Or maybe compare them as to which one,
yeah.
where Devil's Tower fell short, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Devil's Tower, you're right. There has been a lot of important work by groups like the Access Fund to respect a voluntary climbing ban in the month of June, which has, greatly, dropped ascents during that month. I think the challenge with Devil's Tower, Bears Lodge, is that it was a monument that was not. It was the first national monument, of course, but it was a monument that that tribes did not advocate for, and had historically, the wounds are pretty real in terms of the removal that happened there. And I think some of those histories and traumas plays out with the tribes and interacting with these climbers, because the tribes in a real way feel very dispossessed from that landscape and unable to influence its management, because there's no real structure in the management plan that allows for tribes to have equal footing. And, there's still climbing guides today that, I watched a movie about one of them that still takes people up and talks about sort of his right to do this. And I feel kind of sad for that person because it's incredibly ignorant of the history.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those politics flying around Devil's Tower. But I think speaking about another national monument like Bears Ears, the reason why it was different is that this was a national monument that was created and proposed by 5 tribes. And the original monument designation was effectively going down the path of a co-management regime with the U.S. government and the Intertribal Coalition. And that would have not been a precedent. It would have been a precedent in terms of the size, because this was, 5 tribes, the 5 tribes that came together, not all of them have been friends, but they saw the importance of working collectively, but also exerting their sovereignty off tribal lands to leverage some of these laws and these recognition that they have with the federal government that, say, the outdoor industry doesn't have. And I think that was particularly powerful because Bears Ears, in a large part, I think sets an important precedent of how we look at managing national parks, is that in this case, the tribes would have an equal seat at the table in terms of management decisions as well. And I think that was one of the most powerful pieces of that. But the other was that there was a lot of work being done between climbers and tribes on that particular issue to ensure that climbing and other recreation opportunities were protected as well in the monument. And, I think for many tribes, for example, back in Devil's Tower, the idea of climbing is pretty detestable in some people's eyes. But in Bears Ears, there's some of that as well. But one of the things that really seemed to thread the needle on making this work is, talking about climbers as stewards and also being the eyes and ears on the ground as well. And that seemed to bridge the divide a little bit more. And I think that's where I think it's an important milestone, I think, in terms of thinking about land management going forward.
See, I love hearing that explanation because that's a perfect example of, I'm very curious, very engaged, feel like I understand a lot of stuff. And I didn't have the full story on Devil's Tower and Bears Ears. And I think and now I do. And so, I think that, and that's, obviously it's one person than everybody listening, but that's just a perfect example of the importance of just having these discussions and getting this information out there, because people want it. They want to know the true story. And so as you do all day long, it just reinforces the importance of the work you're doing. So here's a kind of a random question, but I'm sure everybody is wondering at this point, how the hell do you do all this stuff? Do you have 35 hours in the day? I don't understand how you manage to juggle so many balls at once. What's your secret?
I do a lot of time management.
You must.
Yeah. I do have, I kind of fell off the bandwagon this past week, but
you need a break, man. It's okay to have a break.
But I also have, with the Natives Outdoors stuff, we have 8 athletes actually that we work with. And, mainly I've been punting a lot of different little projects their way or tasking them with different things. And they're an amazing group of folks. We have people from a Navajo guy that lives in a van in a new, Ford Transit on the res, and he's a graphics designer, to a pro climber named Aaron Mike. He's climbing 513, 514.
Wow.
And then also a Lakota guy that's a free skier that we just brought on. And so, we have a lot of talent on the sports side, but also we also have a number of folks that are incredibly talented on other pieces as well. And so, they're a huge part of what makes this go. And the other, in terms of the apparel side, my mom is the warehouse and fulfillment center.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So she's helping, and we're paying a contract, and so it's been fun to work with her, and she's very good at what she does too. So it's been fun to, in a lot of ways, I think a lot of the effectiveness of the work that I've been doing is just making connections and just finding talent and like cultivating that and building people to then, take this work further.
Where would you say your work ethic comes from? Is that something you've had your whole life, that kind of focus and ability to just crank through things efficiently, or is that something you've had to develop over time?
I think it's gotten honed. It's been honed, definitely. But I think as a kid, I definitely would get incredibly obsessive, I guess, and focused on stuff. I used to play with Legos a lot for like hours at a time, and I would have these, big projects. But I think one of the things that I've seen this happen. I've done this on mountains before. Like if it starts getting really painful, I can't think straight. It's just setting small goals.
Yes.
And just being able to like tick off even the smallest thing, like I'm going to send this email to so-and-so, or, I'm going to do that. Like having that on the to-do list. It's like it's kind of, I almost feel like it's a little bit of hot wiring my reward system in my brain. But,
whatever works. I mean, it's obviously working. I think about that. I do the mountain climbing analogy all the time. And I think about, when you're climbing a mountain, you don't want to just keep looking at the summit. You look up maybe every so often, then you worry about this step, next step, then make sure and that breaking down into small tasks allows me to build momentum, which eventually leads to getting at least a little bit of stuff done.
I know, especially in climbing a mountain. We just went up Humphreys Peak here in Arizona. It's called Dokoasleet in Navajo. It's the only alpine mountain in Arizona. It's like 12.6. Mm-hmm. We went up with a Patagonia snowboarder named Forrest Shearer, and I didn't sleep very well the night before, and I didn't hydrate properly. So I was really just not doing well on the mountain. I remember it was just looking at a rock, 10 feet ahead of it. I'm just going to get to that. It was like 60-mile-an-hour winds too. So it was definitely a moment of just having to, yeah, you're right. Just kind of little steps at a time and building momentum. And we made it down, thankfully, but
it's funny when you get home from these mountain climbing trips, how the kind of the most intense and at the time most miserable part of it ends up being the most memorable. And it's what you don't remember the fun stuff or like the quote fun stuff. But when you really get your ass kicked, those are some of the best memories, really. And that's hard for people who don't do it to understand.
Yeah, it's a form of masochism.
It really is, man. Well, I'm always asking for book recommendations on this podcast, mainly completely selfishly for myself. But if you had to pick a few of your favorite books about Native American culture that you feel like are must reads for Americans, or do any come to mind that you feel like everybody could benefit a lot from reading?
There's I think just general history. There's a book called An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, I think.
Yes.
That's a good one. It's just kind of providing another lens on history. One specific to the Navajo that I read a while ago that was really cool was called West of the 30s, mm-hmm. and it was by Edward T. Hall. But it was his time out on the Navajo and Hopi res in the 1930s. It was just a really kind of cool vignette of that community, but also just it's just a neat little book that I read a little while ago.
Cool. I've got the first one on my shelf. I've yet to read it, and then I had not heard of the second one, so those are perfect. I
was going to say the last one I'm reading right now is called Firecracker Boys.
I haven't heard of that either. Cool.
It's about it's a pretty dark book, but it was about some nuclear testing that they were doing in northern Alaska that impacted a bunch of Native communities. But they were effectively what was being planned in Alaska by somewhere like near Nome, is that they were going to build a large inland port somewhere up there, and they were going to use nuclear bombs to basically blow up, to make this harbor. And it actually didn't end up happening, but they took some Nevada test dirt and buried it up there to see what the effects would be on traditional foods, to basically see how to render indigenous people like ineffective because of this nuclear waste. It's really dark history, but it's also an important piece, I think, in looking at, just kind of our recent history and some of the things that are going on. But it's a neat book. It kind of gives the context of the nuclear arms race in Alaska and how that affected it there. So
cool. And I'll have links for people listening. Go to the webpage and you can click through to see all these books. Well, I've got a set of questions that I ask everybody I have on the podcast, and it's pretty cool to compare the answers. So maybe we can run through those, and then I'll let you get back to your 50 different jobs. You may have just answered this, but with that last list of books. But what would you say are your favorite books about the American West in general?
Let's see. I've been a fan of Cormac McCarthy's work.
That comes up over and over and over. It's amazing how consistent that is. That's so cool.
I mean, that's just been a really good one. The other is Hampton Sides, his work.
He's been on the podcast twice.
Yep, I saw that. Yeah, his Blood and Thunder was a fun book, fun read, and trying to think of what else I've read of his. That was the one that kind of stuck with me. But I really enjoyed that writing. And then also, actually, a really good book that I read was House of Rain by Craig Childs.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't read it though.
Yeah, it was a cool. I think it was very engaging for me because I know a lot of those places that he was going, and so it was nice to kind of fill in the history and stories behind these places and his sort of journey to look at, the ancestral Puebloans and their connection in the Southwest. Because that's an ever-present thing. If you're ever in, the Four Corners, is the Anasazi ancestral Puebloan people that live there.
Cool. Those are all good ones. Do you have any favorite documentaries or films?
Oof. Documentaries or films. I'm partial to Free Solo because I just watched that recently.
I haven't seen it yet. I watched Dawnwall the other day, and is it just unreal?
It's just, I think what's so amazing. I mean, the New York Times called it the greatest human achievement in human history, or something like that, in modern history, which I can't disagree with. But I think I think one of the things that I just haven't been a fan of with a lot of climbing movies is that it doesn't give like sort of the backstory of people or, kind of humanizes people. It's about the climb. And I think what, Chai and Jimmy who directed that, I mean, they really did a phenomenal job on, really providing the human element of this particular story.
I can't wait to see it. I might watch it this weekend.
Yeah, you totally should. It's worth your time.
So in all your outdoor adventures all over the place, big mountains, deserts, is there one experience that sticks out in your mind as being the most powerful experience you've had? And that could mean scary, it could mean funny, just a extremely powerful outdoor experience.
I have to go through the Rolodex a little bit.
It's hard to pick, when you've done a lot of cool stuff.
I'm actually going to be climbing a peak this weekend called Babo Kivari, which is down here in Arizona. It's a sacred peak to the Tohono O'odham. But it's a 4 or 5 pitch climb. That's going to be cool. And I think that'll be a really cool experience. But I think more recently about climbing, I was out at Kochi Stronghold back in November, and we climbed up a 5/8 route up this dome. And the thing about Kochi Stronghold is that it's very high commitment climbing. I mean, there's places where it's 30 feet between bolts and stuff like that, just really, it gets in your head. And so these things that on paper are like moderate climbs are actually mentally pretty challenging. But we we climbed up this 5-pitcher called Euphoria, and there's a ledge right before the last pitch that's 700 feet off the deck, and we kind of meandered our way up there, and then we spent the night on that ledge. And I didn't really sleep. I was having nightmares that the ledge was going to crumble off. And all
Understandable.
But waking up the next morning and just being able to see that ledge, it was phenomenal. I mean, just see the valley below. That was one that stuck with me. And then the other more recent is I do a lot of skiing is kind of my strong point. I generally let other people lead climb for me, but on that trip we did to Doko's Lead or Humphreys Peak, we had just phenomenal conditions because in Arizona, the snowpack there is about 160% of average right now.
Wow!
So it's really deep, and we had about 3,000 feet of fresh powder all the way down because it had been sitting under the clouds for a day, and we just went off the summit and just had this wonderful ride down. And I don't know if it'll ever happen again with that much snow, but I think it'll definitely be one that'll stick in the memory when there's no snow on that mountain 50 years from now.
Yeah. That's a whole different story. Wow. Yeah, those are great. If you had to pick one, and this is hard, can you name your favorite location in the West? Could be a mountaintop, a trail, a town, a certain park.
I'm a big fan of the Sangre de Cristos and Blanca Peak. I mean, just the prominence of those mountains and just they're intense. I think in terms of that, I think the other place that sticks with me is the Wallowa Mountains in northeast Oregon. Mm-hmm. That's been a really cool place. I spent a little bit of time that I really want to get back to.
I've never been there. I've spent a bunch of time in the Sangres, but never that part of Oregon. But I've heard it's pretty unreal.
Yeah, I'm going to tell everyone now it's terrible.
Yeah, never mind. It's awful. You don't want to go there. So 2 more questions. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think one of them I got from my great aunt, and she told me that, if I ever want to do work to help people, I need to be in a good place myself. Yeah. And that's stuck with me. And I think the way I've taken that to heart is just making sure that, I do stuff outside and stuff that I enjoy and keeps me, happy. And that's been a big piece of, I think my success is just also taking care of myself. And, I do work a lot, but also I do a ton of stuff outdoors. And, I realize that even just that 20-30 minutes of just taking time outside and doing something that clears my mind often makes my work more effective. And I can, be much more, efficient and sort of and clear-headed about the things I'm doing.
Yeah, I agree. The whole reason I exercise is just for that purpose exactly, for the mental clarity. I mean, I like it and I enjoy it and I love being outdoors, but there's so much more to it than that. It fuels everything else.
Totally.
So last big question. If you could make a request of the people that listen to this podcast, and as people that love the American West in one way or the other, whether that's through outdoor recreation or ranching or conservation or art, if you could either offer some words of wisdom or ask them to do something, is there anything that comes to mind?
I think, we're in any place that we go and recreate, I think just doing the due diligence of, if you're learning the trail or route or whatever, learn about the indigenous people that call that place home. And I think that's a quick Google search away. But it also, it really adds depth to that experience because, a lot of this outdoor adventuring, people have been doing it for thousands of years. Yep. So, and I think just in being a part of that story, I think is incredibly valuable and adds meaning to that work.
That's awesome. So how can people connect with you online?
Social media. That's the best way. My Instagram is kind of where I hang out quite a bit. It's kind of what the people my age and younger using as a platform. So Len Necefer is my handle, and then Natives Outdoors is the company's. And those are I would say, the easiest way to see my work and connect with me as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this. This is very inspiring and educational. I really appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in September.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountaineerprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.